All right, good morning. Sorry that this video is going to be coming out a bit later today than usual. I've been running into some technical issues getting things uploaded, and that's on me. So thank you for your patience, and thank you to those that are going to watch this video. So you guys should have yesterday been finishing up your essays on the issues surrounding gun rights here in the United States and finalized your opinions on that. And then we're going to be beginning our next major unit, which deals with minimum wage and income inequality here in the United States. In particular, we're going to be talking about do we need to adjust how we provide minimum income to people in the United States? And I want to say adjust minimum income because we're not just going to talk about minimum wage. A lot of it is going to focus on that because here in the United States, that is how we have decided to supplement the income of a large variety of Americans, providing them with a fixed amount of income. But there are other possible alternatives out there, and that's something that's becoming a more common piece of discussion in news today. And so that's what we're going to kind of focus on with this unit. And what I want to start off by was just talking about what exactly is minimum wage, where does it come from, what's its purpose. So that'll be the focus for today. But before we get to any of that, I wanted to really kind of answer this question of why are we covering this unit? Why are we discussing minimum wage? And it largely has to do with what's going on in current events right now. I'm sure many of you have probably heard, or from your parents, from others, or the news, somehow come into contact with the idea that very recently and right now, Americans across the country should be receiving $1,200 one-time checks from the United States government. This is part of something called the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act. And it was a small portion of a $2.3 trillion relief fund that the United States government has put out to try and help deal with the economic issues that we are facing right now as a country. As you guys are aware, pretty much everything is shut down and a lot of businesses are not making money, like restaurants, any non-essential business, really, bars, golf courses, unless you're El Paso, and then they're just like, nah, man, we're going to do it anyway. But all of these things are not making the income that they should. And similarly, all the people that initially worked at these places are not making the same amount of money. Like if you were a waiter, you in theory are not getting paid right now. And so this check was designed to help offset that. It's supposed to be $1,200 that every citizen can use to cover any of those expenses they might be struggling to pay, whether it's rent, food, clothes, whatever the case, gas. I don't know why you need gas if you're not going to work or allowed to leave your home, but it's there to solve that problem. However, there has been another bill recently proposed. This is the Emergency Money for the People Act. It was proposed back on April 14th, so, about 14 days ago. And this bill was proposed by Representative Ro Khanna and Tim Ryan. Ro Khanna from California, Tim Ryan from Ohio. And what these guys proposed is that the $1,200 single-time check was not enough to help us get through this global crises. And they proposed, and the bill is currently being discussed, to provide everybody over the age of 16, so all citizens' households, $2,000 a month for the next year. And this is a bill that has run into a ton of resistance. It's very hotly debated. And the reason for that is because it boils down to an issue that has actually been something at the heart of American discourse for a while now, which is what amount of income are people entitled to? How much is the government responsible for providing for you? And what I mean by that is whether it is minimum wage, just $2,000 a month payment, what is the role of the government in making sure that you can afford to survive? And so that's kind of what I wanted to look at in this unit, is to explore that question of what is needed to survive and what responsibility, if any, does the government have in making sure that you meet the financial requirements of existing as a human being? Because as it should hopefully be no surprise, there is a cost to that. Like, there is a very fixed amount of money that you need to just kind of exist in society. You cannot get by without some sort of income. And now granted, there are a whole sort of different levels of income based off of your work, and people are paid more or less, and all of that is accounted for. But people, for the past number of years, have consistently argued that the structures that we have set up in society right now to provide for that fixed amount of money that you need to exist are not adequate. People are not receiving enough money that they need to survive. And so this sort of debate has arisen where, you know, what is that amount and how much are people entitled to, or what are people entitled to? Are they entitled to $2,000 a month? Are they entitled to be able to purchase a home? Are they entitled to be able to survive off of minimum wage? Where does all of that fall? And so this unit is going to be focused on trying to kind of explore those questions, starting with minimum wage. We'll come back to this $2,000 a month bill, and we'll talk a lot more about it. It's a very important concept known as universal basic income that is definitely worth exploring. But before we get to any of that, I thought it would be good to look at what sort of structures we have in place right now, and that's minimum wage. So later this week, you guys are going to be exploring what you can and can't do with minimum wage. But before we get to any of that, I really want to address this idea of like, what exactly is minimum wage? Where did it come from? How has it changed? And why does it exist to begin with? I imagine you guys can probably hear the lawnmower, which is not ideal. As you can see, it's freaking out my cat. So hopefully I'll just have to kind of talk louder than that. Also, hopefully my cat does not like shove herself out the window. So with that, we're just going to get right into talking about minimum wage today, kind of giving you that important background information. So first and foremost, it's important to note that minimum wage is not an American idea. It's one that we took from other countries, but is definitely not unique to us. The very first minimum wage actually took place in 1894, and it was an experiment in New Zealand. Hey, we've talked about them before. To try and establish a minimum basic income. And they continue to be kind of one of the front runners for having a strong minimum wage, putting a lot behind the concept of minimum wage being important to their citizenry. The first state to actually employ it happens actually many years later. As you can see, about 8 years later, Massachusetts passes the first minimum wage law. They're our first state to do so. And initially, it only covered women and children. It did not set a minimum wage for men. Other states then started to follow suit and pass a bunch of minimum wage laws. But interestingly enough, the United States Supreme Court actually initially ruled that minimum wage laws were unconstitutional. They said that it was unacceptable for the federal government to force businesses to pay a certain amount of money. They were overstepping their boundaries. They're not allowed to regulate that. It was nowhere given to Congress in their legislative powers to set a minimum amount of money that people can make. They argued, nope, that's for businesses to decide. This topic was kind of left then. So from like 1912 to 1933, we couldn't have minimum wage because the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do it. It's not allowed. However, in 1933, it's going to become a topic of discussion again. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, is going to pass the New Deal to help combat the Great Depression, try and solve the fact that many Americans at the time were unemployed. It was an economic crisis, similar to what we potentially are approaching now with high levels of unemployment, people not making money, people not being able to afford basic necessities like food or housing. As part of his solution to the Great Depression, FDR passed something called the National Industrial Recovery Act, or the NIRA, which once again created a federal minimum wage. So boom, did it again. This time, however, it's important to note that it's not states, it's federal. So rather than each individual state deciding what they want to do, the federal government has made a blanket statement that all businesses across all states had to pay 25 cents an hour, which would be about the equivalent of $4 an hour today. This, once again, becomes a problem. The Supreme Court steps in again and says, no, you can't do it. We talked about this before. Why are you bringing this up to discuss again? It is not acceptable. And they rule the NIRA unconstitutional in the case Shetner Poultry Corporation versus the United States. And once again, they ruled that the United States or Congress was exceeding the Commerce Clause. And what the Commerce Clause is a section of the Constitution which specifically says that Congress has the right to regulate commerce within the United States. Commerce being anything related to trade, money, business, things like that. And so you would think initially, right, that the Commerce Clause would allow them to regulate a federal minimum wage, to set that amount. They are regulating commerce, how much you have to pay your workers. Well, the Supreme Court stated, no, you are not, because commerce is trade, so that's like buying and selling of products. You cannot fix the pay because that has nothing to do with the buying and selling of products. That is how much a business chooses to offer someone to work for them, and that has zero correlation to actual commerce. So, nope, still not allowed to get on out of here. And they once again abolish that minimum wage. They again step in and say, no, you cannot say how much people are allowed to make. So we wait a couple years, and then once again, FDR was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make them get a minimum amount of money. You can't stop me, Supreme Court. And so in 1938, he passes the Fair Labor Standards Acts, the FLSA, the falafel. I don't know how you say it. That's the FLSA. It's not as fun though. And this one creates, once again, the mandatory minimum wage of 25 cents. He's like, gosh darn it, let those people make $4 an hour. They need it. And his justification, the way he tried to sell it again for the third time in U.S. history, was that people need a minimum standard of living necessary for health, efficiency, and general well-being. Tying it back to that part of the Constitution where it says that you are entitled to the pursuit of, or sorry, not the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, this idea of the pursuit of happiness, and that this is necessary in order to be healthy and happy. So again, we go to the courts. We got to talk about it because, boy, businesses do not want to have to pay people more money. Kind of a staple of American society and business in general. Like, if they don't have to pay you a certain amount, they generally don't want to, because that's more profit for the business. And so in 1941, the FLSA is questioned in the Supreme Court case, United States versus Darby Lumber Company. The Darby Lumber Company was like, no, we don't want to pay them that. Please don't make us pay them that much money. We were paying them way less. And in this case, they overturn it. They do it. Congratulations, minimum wage wins. It is accepted. And this time, the Supreme Court's ruling is that Congress does, in fact, have the right to regulate employment conditions, because that is, in fact, a component of the health and safety of the average citizen. And so Congress is allowed to make laws for the well-being of American citizens. So from there, we start to see the progressive change of minimum wage. With this key mindset, I really want to drive home this idea that this is the core justification going forward, the idea that minimum wage is a minimum standard of living necessary for health, efficiency, and general well-being. That's going to be very important as we kind of expand on minimum wage. It's going to be the driving force going forward. So once we officially get to keep it in 1941, we'll then see a progression of minimum wage in the coming years. So in 1949, the minimum wage is raised from 40 cents an hour to 75 cents officially. So the federal minimum wage goes up. This one's significant because it expands coverage for workers in the air transport industry. So initially, minimum wage did not cover everybody. It was like just factory workers. This one now says, okay, no, if you are a flight attendant, you also are entitled to minimum wage. So it's important to note that at this time, it's not universal. In 1961, we see an increase again to $1.15 an hour. And in this one, we see an additional amendment that includes coverage of the retail industry. So now if you work in a grocery store, a clothing store, you are now covered as well. A mall, that you are covered, you are hit with that minimum wage. And then also, because of this, increases the coverage from about 250,000 workers to about 2.2 million workers in the United States. So this one is a very big jump in who is entitled to this minimum wage. And then in 1968, we see the buying power of minimum wage peak at $1.60 an hour. If you were go based off of 2014 dollar bills, it would be about $10.79 an hour. And then from there, we will continue to see adjustments in minimum wage. However, the buying power is going to progressively decrease over the next 45 years. And that's super important to what we're going to be discussing. I very quickly also want to just kind of explain what I mean by buying power. And what that's referring to is how much you can actually get with your dollar. So for example, say someone is only paid $5 an hour. However, a soda costs 10 cents. You can buy a large number of sodas. I probably should have mathed this out before I had done any of this, but I didn't. So here we go. So you can buy 50 sodas, right? For $5 at 10 cents a bottle. Now, let's say that someone else is making $10 an hour. However, sodas cost $5. At that, you can now only get 2 sodas. So even though the person in the first example was making half as much money an hour as the second one, the buying power of their dollar is higher because the prices are lower. This is going to be the key component of buying power and how the buying power of minimum wage and the dollar is going to decrease over the next 45 years. Although people will be making more money per hour than they were in previous years, the price of goods is going to progressively go up, reducing the overall usefulness of that dollar. So in 1977, a new amendment will eliminate the separate minimum wage for large agricultural employers. So originally we had like retail, factory, and then agriculture are separate, and they had to do 2 different things. It's kind of like how today, if you work in the restaurant industry as a waiter or waitress and you get tips, your minimum wage is different than someone who works in retail. Like for example, in Illinois, retail right now I believe is $9.25 an hour, whereas a restaurant worker for Illinois is $7.25. I believe those numbers might be a little bit off, but there is this big gap. They instead, in 1977, create a uniform minimum wage, and they set it at $2.30 an hour. Then from there, we continue to see more progression. So from 1981 to 1990, minimum wage is just kind of locked at $3.35 an hour. In 1977, we see an increase to $5.15 an hour, and then it's locked for about another 10 years at that. During this time, we see an important shift, whereas up to 1997 and the Clinton administration, the states had been forced to embrace the federal minimum wage. They had to do it. They couldn't set their own. Under the Clinton administration, he changes that. So now there is the federal minimum wage that sets that finite amount at $5.15 an hour. However, he allows states to pay more than that if they would like. They can set their own minimum wage. It just can't be less than the federal. And then in 2009, we see the federal minimum wage go up to $7.25 an hour. And that was the last of a series of incremental raises that took place under the Fair Minimum Wage Act of 2007. And that has been it. That's where it's at. Federal minimum wage has really not changed much from $7.25 an hour. However, states have adjusted from there, and that's continued all the way now to 2020. And so it leads to the core kind of issue surrounding the minimum wage debate today, which is that power of the dollar. Again, what I just previously talked about, the purchasing power, which again, just so you have a clear definition, it's the amount of goods and services that can be purchased with the unit of currency. And again, with my example, like if you have $50 in 2017, 1 loaf of bread costs $5, you can only buy 10 loaves of bread. Now, if you have 50 cents back in 1940 and 1 loaf costs 2 cents, you can buy 25 loaves of bread. And so even though your money that you have more money in 2017, you can buy a lot more bread in 1940. And so this buying power of the dollar has become one of the central focuses of the argument of minimum wage, and this idea of whether we need to raise it or not, looking at the overall buying power. And so as we go forward, that's kind of what you're going to be looking at, is trying to identify, is there a problem with our current minimum wage right now? Do we need to have people make more money because the buying power has decreased? Or if we increase minimum wage, will that cause additional or separate problems? As you can see across the board, the United States has already had a pretty controversial history with minimum wage. We don't necessarily like to raise it all that much. We didn't even want it to exist in the first place. And so it's been kind of this constant battle to shift and change the minimum wage and adjust it so that people can meet that minimum requirement of an efficient, healthy lifestyle. So to explore that further, what you're going to be doing for the rest of the week is you're going to be investigating minimum wage. You guys will have a research assignment in which you're going to look at an area of the country, your choice, perhaps maybe where you want to live later on in life, and you're going to see, is there a problem? Can we survive off of minimum wage right now or not? And if so, what kind of lifestyle does that look like? And does it seem like it meets that minimum for healthy, efficient living? So thank you for sticking through to the end of the video if you did. If not, shame on you. You won't see this, so it doesn't really matter. And with that, have a wonderful rest of your day. See you.